Hello and welcome to our next episode of Community Chat, where we talk about things related to faith and religion and community of Christ and all that. And my name is Sean Langdon. I am one of your co-hosts for this, along with Carla Long. For today's episode, we are going to talk about getting shameless about faith and sex. So I'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment, but I just want to give everyone here joining us today an opportunity to introduce themselves. So why don't we go ahead and go Jamie, Tammy, Carla, and then myself. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Smith. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. Let's see. I am a lifelong member of Community of Christ. I was ordained as an evangelist in November, and I serve on the pastorate team here at the Indianapolis congregation, and live here with my 4 kids and 2 dogs. So that's it. That's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Jamie, you have to be one of the youngest evangelists.
I know, I was just thinking that too.
I've had a couple people say that that's probably true. One of the youngest. So it was definitely not a call that I imagined myself in as far as who I know in that call. Right? Like I was like, how do I fit that profile? But I'm glad it's been exciting to learn about that.
Cool. Tammy?
I'm Tammy Perryman, also use she, her. I am pastoring out at a rural congregation just outside of Chicago now, and frankly have traveled around quite a bit of the United States in the capacity of pastor and associate pastor and outreach minister, working particularly with the homeless populations. So that's where my heart has been.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carla Long. I'm the pastor of the Salt Lake City Community of Christ, and I work for Community of Christ, and I live in beautiful, stunning Eagle Mountain, Utah, and I'm super excited to be here. And I'm wearing an animal print shirt today. I'm originally from Kansas, and wearing an animal print is probably as wacky as we get in Kansas. So I'm being pretty wacky today, which I'm very excited about.
Awesome. And I'm Sean Langdon, and I live in Vancouver, Washington. My pronouns are he, him, and I work for the church as an invitation youth and camping minister for the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center out here. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining today and participating. For today's focus, like I said, getting shameless about faith and sex. A few years ago, Nadia Bolz-Weber released a book called Shameless, Sexual Reformation for the Church. This was a book that impacted me a lot and had helped kind of shift a lot of my ministry and focus and what I was passionate about. And it also was a book that kind of uncovered some hidden things about me and my own journey, as I think it is for a lot of people that read it. I got an opportunity to see Nadia on her book tour when she presented it with a few other Community of Christ folks here in the Portland, Oregon area. So we're going to explore some just questions about sex and faith and the impact of it in our lives. Some of the questions that we're going to be looking at today will be: growing up, what messages did you receive from the church about sex and the body? How do these messages affect you, and how have you navigated your life as an adult since then? But I first want to kind of get us going, and then we can just dive on into a conversation about all this, is a quote from the book. It doesn't feel very difficult to draw a direct line between the messages many of us received from the church and the harm we've experienced in our bodies and spirit as a result. So my argument in this book is this: we should not be more loyal to an idea, a doctrine, or an interpretation of a Bible verse than we are to people. If the teachings of the church are harming the bodies and spirits of people, we should rethink those teachings. With that, let us go ahead and dive on in, and whoever wants to get started, we'll go.
I was thinking about a message, like the messages that I learned from the church. And I kind of feel like I cannot pinpoint a negative or shameful message that I learned specifically from my Community of Christ or RLDS church upbringing. I'm sure that there were some things that kind of seeped through messages that I picked up, but I don't remember anything. I mean, I remember, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe there were rules about swimsuits at camp or something like that growing up. But I feel like one of the things that I was thinking about just as you were reading that, Sean, is I remember the years that I was at Spec, I went to the sex class. I mean, I don't even know if that wasn't the official name, but that's what we called it. And that class was, I mean, it was always just overflowing, and it was great conversation with a facilitator who was shameless about everything. And can I say his name? Can I say who it was?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the facilitator when I was at Spec was John Billings. And John Billings had lived in Indianapolis. And so I knew John when I was growing up a little bit. And I remember feeling like in that conversation that I felt like the church that I attended, that I belonged to, was making sure that we were talking about normalizing sex, right? I mean, I know that wasn't exactly what was happening, but that's the message that I remember taking away. But then when I came home to outside of Spec world, I came home, the messages that I picked up, I think were more from my friends and like their religious upbringings, school rules and dress codes. And I remember being sent home in 8th grade for the outfit I had on. That was not a problem. I remember my mom arguing with the principal about that. So again, I wasn't internalizing anything shameful about my clothes from my mom, at least not at that time. So I don't know, but I just really can't pinpoint negative experiences or memories specifically in the church, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And actually I'm going to go right next because you are saying a lot of things that that's bringing stuff in me from my own young years as well, because I just had a conversation recently with somebody about Spec back when I was a teenager, which was, 22 years ago. I was sharing about that class and how I never went to it. I would have been mortified probably to go to it with where I was at, but and uncomfortable. But I remember that was like such a popular class that everybody was going to, and the person I was telling was like, I don't even remember that. I'm like, oh, it was a big deal. Mm-hmm. I don't remember hearing about anything related to sex and body like that stuff growing up in the church. And I think that's actually, for me, that's part of the problem. Because when there's not, even if it's not, so that wasn't necessarily a negative thing. Though there was later on in life, I discovered some other negative stuff that I'll get into probably. But when you don't hear it from a positive perspective, from a healthy way, then what you do hear then get to is all the negative stuff that's out there in culture, right? Like friends and entertainment and other things. And so, yeah, I do. That was definitely part of my experience as well. I just got to note that the whole thing about clothing, and of course, for me, I'm a male, so it's a little different, right? Like there was never any rules about what guys, could or couldn't wear in terms of that, right? It was always about females and what they could wear and what kind of, what their swimsuit needed to be like and all the kind of stuff. And so there was, just a few years ago, there was still in the guidelines for Spec, there was stuff about clothing, appropriate attire. And it was definitely more driven towards females. And it was definitely more about, making sure that they are dressed in a respectful way to avoid, how, guys and obviously other females as well. It's not, let's be honest, but guys, would respond and react. And I said, this is really problematic that this is still, in our Spec, guidelines for that. And the Spec directing team is just wonderful. And they said, you're right. That's old. That's like from stuff in the past that we just never, reviewed. And they got rid of it. They took it out immediately. And I just so much appreciated that. But so your comment there did kind of, inspire that thought.
I remember that class too, Jamie. And because we just realized that we're close in age. And, the popularity of that class should speak volumes to us, should speak just huge volumes to us, because kids, teenagers, probably even younger kids now are super, super curious to hear about sex from someone that they trust, or in a place that they trust, or in a place that they can be hopefully fully authentically themselves. And so what that tells me, and I didn't remember about that class either, Sean, but I definitely went. But what that tells me is that as a pastor, I really need to be more proactive about talking about sex, because I'm okay in the reactive place. Like if someone wants to talk to me about that, I'm totally fine to have that conversation. But I think one of the problems is, at least in the Salt Lake City congregation, is that I'm not proactive about talking about it. We don't have a class, for instance, about sex or anything like that for our kids. Like a place where they can talk about it in a healthy way, in a safe way, in a way that is not with necessarily just with friends who may or may not have the right information. And so, I mean, just the popularity of that class has led me already down this rabbit hole that I need to be doing something more. I know that at least the UCC church here in Salt Lake City, they have a whole program from age 5 to age 18 that the kids go through. It's called the OWL program, I want to say. So I don't know, it's an acronym for something.
I have the parent, or the parent facilitator on this bookshelf right here from the OWL program. Yeah.
It is the OWL program, because I thought I was getting it mixed up with Hogwarts for a second.
Nope, you're good.
That's good. Well, yeah, so you have it. You know what I'm talking about. And I know it would take a huge effort on Community Christ's part, and we don't always have the people to do that. Maybe even we don't have the expertise to do that. But that sounds like something that would really benefit our people. And so anyway, that was just a huge good reminder for me, Jamie.
Well, my experience has been a little bit different because I did not grow up in the church, but my parents were pretty adamant that I go to church, and they used to drop me off at the Baptist church on the military base that we lived on. And I remember being there as a child, not having family around me. It was just my sister and I who had to go. And I went and sat with friends. And it just so happened that the friends that I sat with were all boys. And we're talking young, like maybe third grade, 8 years old or so. And after church, I got chastised for sitting with my friends. And for me, it didn't make any difference that they were boys or girls or whatever. None of that made any difference. They were just my friends. I was so incensed that they would yell at me about that I told my parents I wasn't going back, and they didn't force me. So that was my first experience, just really being told that I was a bad person because I had friends of an opposite sex and I shouldn't be hanging out around them. When I started with Community of Christ in the RLDS church, of course, I started in the camping program. And again, there was this separation of the sexes. The boys had a cabin on one side of the campground, the girls had a cabin on a completely other side of the campground, and there was this invisible line that you didn't cross. And, it was just yards outside of our cabins, that the boys couldn't come near the girls' cabins, girls couldn't come near the boys' cabins, and everybody kind of had to meet in the middle. I didn't think much about it. I guess I just thought that was a normal thing until people kind of started hooking up at camps, and that was fairly normal too. But they would have these people that would follow the couples around to make sure that whatever was going on was still camp appropriate. And I thought that was a little bit on the odd side. But as far as dress code and everything goes, I will say that at my high school camp, we did have a cross-dressing fashion show once. So there you go. Maybe it didn't matter too much.
Interesting.
I was just going to say, we had the same rule at our campgrounds. I mean, in all honesty, we do now. It's just tree line, like in front of the camp, in front of where the boys, like their side, there's these trees, and we call it tree line. And as a director, we would just sit at the flagpole with where there's a bench, and you would just yell tree line if somebody was too close to the line. And it was kind of like, it wasn't hateful or anything. It was just kind of funny. Like, you're just yelling tree line. So the girls would be reminded that they couldn't go farther. And as you were talking, all I heard in my head was tree line, tree line.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, first I gotta say, Jamie, I love your shirt. I just noticed what you were wearing. It's a great shirt.
Thank you.
I also, it's interesting as a youth minister, this conversation in the past couple of years has been in my head a lot, because, like Carla was talking about, like what do we need to provide, and that's in my head. It's like, how is there? I am left with this question of wondering, how do I, what's the best approach for us involved in youth ministries to even tackle these conversations at camps or in other venues that maybe are more optional than a camp might be, and working with parents on that, and what does that look like? And because I have become really passionate about, like, how do we start having these conversations in the life of the church? Because I also know, like, for me, I grew up a closeted kid. I didn't understand that. I'm bisexual. I didn't understand that, what it meant. So all I had, of course, with the religious, in the church, I knew that we were not there with inclusion. I knew that I was surrounded by people that were inclusive, but I knew that the church was not there. So that had its own things in my head. And I saw people that I knew and cared about that had situations who were, because they were in same gender relationships, where the church responded, and they, in a way that was negative for them and for their support, for their allies and others in the community. But I was, because of what I said earlier about what we didn't talk about, and what only able to then pick up the voices from other areas. All I had were those other voices coming in me, and so there was a lot of shame attached to religion and trying to figure out who I was in my sexuality, and also being a larger kid, and so there was all of that tied together. That honestly, when it came to like the conversation of sex, it totally messed me up. Like, it totally, and for years into my adulthood, it just totally affected that, and a way it still does today in different ways and of showing up. But it just reminds me again how important it is that when we don't talk about things, it doesn't mean they don't exist. It means that other people are being given the microphone to talk about them, and we may not like what they're going to say and impact others with.
I'm with you, Sean. I think, and this is probably true. I think this is true across the board, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but really it's the fear, right? The fear that we're going to say too much, the fear we're going to say the wrong thing, the fear that we're going to embarrass ourselves, the fear that maybe we don't have all the information. It's all fear-based, I think. And I think it's fear-based for me, at least. And again, I could be wrong for everyone else. But I just don't know I just don't always know the right thing to say. And if I don't know the right thing to say, surprisingly, I actually am quiet, which is a surprise to a lot of people who are listening to this probably. But I just worry that I'm going to say the wrong thing. Is that true for everyone? And if it is true for everyone, how do we know that we're not saying the wrong thing?
I think that's definitely true for me. And I've had to, because, so I have 4 kids, ages 14, 12, 10, 7. And a few years ago, it's probably been close to 10 years ago, I just decided I had to make sure that there are no topics off limits in my household. Because because growing up, and it's funny because we live in the same house I grew up in. We bought this house last summer. And so like growing up in this house is where I was going, but I feel like I had to explain that. Growing up in this house, sex and things around sex were not shameful, but like you said, Sean, they weren't discussed. So they weren't shameful, but they weren't normalized. And so what I wanted to do, and when I was thinking about this when my kids were real little, is I was like, I want everything to be a normalized conversation. and I think it was probably on a podcast or in a book. I read somebody talked about how whenever their child would ask them a question, they would say, "That's a really good question. I'm going to go to the bathroom and then we'll talk about it." And like in the bathroom, they would pull themselves together, right? And so that's one of the things that I've tried to put into practice with my kids is all conversations, all topics can be on the table at any time. And there's been a lot of times that I've had to just kind of swallow that lump in my throat and just say it. And a lot of times I'll say, "I don't know for sure, but here's what I think," or "I wonder if," or some people, and I always, because I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? I don't want to give them the wrong information, but I want to make sure that they continue to talk to me. So I am always making sure I'm ready to respond in some way. I feel like I can always go back and we can always go back and have a re-conversation if I say the wrong thing.
I love that.
I remember once being in Solid Rock Cafe, which I know dates me incredibly with this group as the oldest member of this conversation. But, we were working with the kids and we had a time for just sitting down and talking whatever topics that they wanted. And here's where the fear factor comes in. Somebody started on the topic of sex and it was brought up. There were some misinformation items out there that I felt needed to be clarified because I did know the answers to those. And we just kind of opened the conversation up. I didn't have a problem with it until afterwards, when I started thinking about the fact that here I am, and I'm talking to these kids openly and honestly about some very intimate details of their sex lives, and I don't have permission from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that part scared me more than the idea of talking to the kids was, how are the parents going to respond to me being the one to say these things? So although I feel open in my conversations with my own children, and I feel open in the conversations with the kids that have come into my life, I worry more about adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I had a similar experience, Tammy, actually, but I did. So I was a counselor at church camp, since that seems to be the topic of conversation. And I remember this one girl at a senior high camp, and she was like the popular girl, the girl that everyone wanted to hang out with and stuff. And she had a really vulnerable moment. We were getting ready for bed, or we were all laying in bed and just talking. And she said, "Carla, can we talk about sex?" Just like that, just that vulnerable, and she didn't ever have that conversation with me before. And I'm like, you know what? I will be happy to have that conversation with you, but let me call your parents first and talk to them about it. I'm like, is it okay if I call your parents? And then every other girl in the cabin's like, call my parents, call my parents, call my parents. Please, 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 please. And so I talked to the director the next day. I wasn't directing. I talked to the director, and they're like, yeah, if you want to call the parents and see if it's okay, all of the girls can come into your cabin and we can have that. You guys can have that conversation if you want. And I was like, am I ready for that? I mean, I guess I am. But I agree that, they're just hungry for information in a safe space. And I was really, really honored. I was actually honored that she would ask me that question and want that information from me and be vulnerable about that.
Right. Absolutely. I love how you handled that. Because again, there is definitely there's a curiosity, there's a desire, to know that kind of stuff when you're young and start to, explore and understand that. And again, if you're not going to get it from places like that, healthy environments, then they will find it in other environments that may not be healthy for them. So I appreciate that, definitely. Yeah. So part of the book talks about, if shame comes from the church, then the church can also be a place of healing. And the religion can also be a place of healing as well. One of the quotes that she shares in the book, Nadia, if the gospel is where we find healing from the harm done to us by the messages of the church, then it must also be where we find freedom. Meaning that even if the last thing I want to do, I absolutely have to believe that the gospel is powerful enough, transgressive enough, beautiful enough to heal not only the ones who have been hurt, but also those who have done the hurting. And so I guess my question now would be like that I'm thinking about is where would we go from where should we go from here maybe in this conversation in the life of the church? I think we've already heard maybe a few of those examples, shared about things that have already happened, but is there any ideas about maybe ways that the church should address this or approach this? And I mean maybe, again, Christianity, but also Community of Christ and specifically, and especially since we don't have the resources maybe that other faith communities have, but we do have a lot of amazing disciples and volunteers and people who can, and people that are passionate about youth ministries and other ministries, that might be related to this, and there might be avenues for entry points. So any thoughts about that?
Well, I have a super boring answer. I don't know. Well, it's not really all that boring, but I really am so grateful for the work of the church when it comes to the enduring principles. I am so thrilled that we do not have a lot of rules. We still have some rules, and we all know that there's still some rules in Community of Christ. But for the most part, we have values, and we want to follow those values. And when I have a question like this, when I have a question that I do not know how to answer, this might be the dorky Community of Christ Carla coming out, but I go to the enduring principles and I look, is this celebrating the worth of all people? Is this celebrating responsible choices? Is this so on and so forth? And if the answer is no, then I need to look at a different way than what I'm doing. And so we do not have the program that the UCC church has. I don't even know that much about it. Jamie, I'm very curious about it actually. But we do have these incredible values that we can base our lives on and that we can live from. And if we say that these are our core values, then I really think that we need to live those core values.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Carla, I'm glad that you brought up the enduring principles, because I have them laying in front of me. I pulled them out when I was working on a Sunday school lesson. And I actually thought this morning it would be interesting to kind of write these and some bullet points underneath through this lens of the shamelessness and of sex and faith. Because when I look at the enduring principles, one of the things that I think we do so well in the Community of Christ is look outward, right? Look outward at how can we apply all our called to our daily walking, living, working life. And we're really good about looking outward. But for me, this topic is very much a turn inward first. And how do the enduring principles speak to the sacredness of my body? And how do the enduring principles speak to the fact that, and I mean, coming from a female perspective, everything that I feel shame around in one way or another is connected to my body and is connected to each other. If I feel shame around food, it's because of how it's going to affect my body. And my body, I told my son one morning on the way to school, we were talking, and I said, I feel like it was in 8th grade when it clicked with me. One of the things that I learned, that I internalized, was that the purpose of my body was for the boys, and not necessarily touching or anything at that point, but like looking, right? Like, and I think it was the dress code. That was the same year that the dress incident happened. So I was learning that how I dressed affected the boys, and like, was that what this body was for, kind of thing, was a question that I sat with. Well, I don't know if I sat with it at the time, but I had it definitely. And so I think, like, for me personally, the shame that I know that I feel around sex, sexuality, desire, all of that is all also connected to the fact that I was told by society not to trust myself. I don't trust my body. It took me a long time to kind of trust the fact that I could trust my intuition and my own thoughts and my understanding. But I feel like in some way, like, I mean, it's the patriarchy, right? I mean, that's what it goes to, because, and I know that shame around body and food is also something that male and male presenting people deal with. I know, I understand that. But we also don't trust women, right? Like, that's not something our society does. I was having a conversation with a friend last week, and she said one of the things she's learned, she's in a rehab facility after a car accident, and she said one of the things that's become clear to her is that she doesn't trust other women. And she's like, she considers herself very open-minded and very, progressive, but now she's realizing that she doesn't trust other women. So it's, to me, all of these things are connected. They're all connected to shame around my body, which leaks into shame around sex, for sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like the idea of looking at this through the lens of all the enduring principles and coming up with, wouldn't that be a great way to approach a lot of the issues the church, struggles with, is to look at those lenses, those issues through the lenses of every enduring principle and seeing where that we might be shaped by that. That'd be a powerful tool.
Yeah.
There's only one thing I would change, Jamie. Andrew Bolton says we shouldn't use bullet points anymore. We should use the term peace pearls.
I like it.
Yes, exactly. Peace pearls. I love the idea.
Yeah. I mean, I would just call them the little dots. I would call them that too. But yeah, I think it's that lens though. It's what lens are you looking at through the enduring principles? Yeah. I think about that as a parent. If I look at the enduring principles when it comes to my role as a parent, some of these little dots and peace pearls are going to fit in that role, and some might not fit in that specific thing, but there might be others that I can add to it.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I think it comes down to relationship too. And the more we open up within our congregations and just become available and not shockable and all of those things, it encourages our members to be able to come to us with their questions or how they're feeling about their lives. And because we have this issue of relevance within our congregations right now, I think this would be a good area to start in. Is the church going to be relevant? Well, it certainly is to my older congregation. It continues to be relevant, but it's not relevant to the younger people that really at this point just don't see any reason to come.
Yeah.
I mean, Gen Z has changed almost everything. They've thrown out gender, the idea of gender. Who needs gender? So I mean, I thought I'm Gen X and a millennial. I'm a Xennial, a Zennial. I don't know how you say that actually, but that's what I am. I was born in those 5 years between Gen X and millennials. Jamie, you too, right?
Same, yeah.
And I mean, I feel like we made some progress. Gen Xers and millennials made some progress, but Gen Z has taken that progress and shot it way out into the galaxy. And has just really blown open this whole idea. And it's hard for older people older than me and me at times to really even understand what they're talking about, understand where they're coming from. And so I understand. I think we're going to go back to that fear. I'm going to go back to that fear word. I understand the fear of older people not being able to be in the same place, or be, in understanding, not physically, but in understanding in the same place. And I get that. I can really see both sides of how everybody is feeling. And it's hard. It's hard for both sides. I know it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion out there. In my congregation, I have a family where they have a transgender granddaughter and they love her. And we're family. This entire congregation is family. Everybody loves her. But they have a really difficult time understanding why this change came about. Why do they have to call her by a new name? Why is all of this, and where's God in all of this? And the questions that they've had are really very heartbreaking because of their love and their confusion. They're very heartbreaking questions, and talk about not having the answers. Face something like that where I can't explain it. I can just encourage them to move forward in love.
Yeah. Back to that relationship thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think so. There's one of the quotes that from the book, I think just sits with this right here, where she talks about, I think it says, I've started to suspect that the more someone was exposed to religious messages about controlling their desires, avoiding sexual thoughts, and not lusting in their hearts, the less likely they are to be integrated physically, emotionally, sexually, and spiritually. And I think about that word integration and the fear of like the older generation, if I can, and I know it's not always just older generation, but that fear, because our society doesn't set us up for like not authenticity at all, but we also aren't necessarily set up to be comfortable thinking about the fact that something that you've always thought was true might not be true, right? Like, I think for everybody right here, we're all white. I mean, we've been taught growing up in this country that whitewashed history. And when you start learning and kind of looking at it from other perspectives and other lenses, you start to question like, well, what else have I been told that wasn't true? Like, have I been living other lies? And I think like that fear part, I can imagine that when somebody has not faced that, I'm just thinking about the family that you're talking about, Terry, with the transgender granddaughter. Like there's so much deconstructing and unlearning that needs to happen there in order for like a full-on affirmation of her. And that's heavy. Like that's that internal work that, again, we are not encouraged to do in our society.
Yeah, absolutely.
My daughters, both adults, were looking at different churches in their new hometown in the South, and they were just church hopping. They happened to come into this one congregation on a day when the pastor stood up and he said, I would like to ask all of the children to leave the sanctuary. There are things for you to do downstairs. And he sent all of the kids, high school age and younger, downstairs. And he said, now I want to talk to you parents. And he started out by saying, if you are allowing your children to get on the computer without you attending them constantly, I guarantee you that what they are doing is wicked. And he used this word, wicked. And he went through this whole litany of things that normal adolescents would be doing. And it is wicked. And he got to this point where he actually said, in this congregation, in this church, he said, if your sons are having nocturnal emissions, they are wicked. And I have to tell you at this point, my youngest, who will say anything, anywhere, just stood up and said, if your kids are having nocturnal emissions, they are normal. And they walked out.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Talk about messaging within the church.
Yeah. So that's a reminder there that no matter how far we come, there's still so much work to do. And that when we focus on in Community of Christ, we also maybe have the ability to help affect those ripples of change throughout all of Christianity, throughout all of our communities as well. With that, I do want to draw us to our kind of our closing time, unless there's anything else that anybody else was just wanting to get out before I do that.
Just one little thing. I really think, Jamie, your idea about having the peace pearls underneath the enduring principles through a lens of faith and sex is a fantastic idea. I really, really think that's such a great idea. And it could be like a kind of an awesome exercise for congregations to do. right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I just love the idea. Okay, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So when I saw her with my friends, Nadia Bolz-Weber, on her book tour, they handed us a piece of a kind of a postcard, and it said, "I'm ready to be shameless about dot dot dot." And she invited us to complete those cards and then turn them in at the end of the session. And then her staff went back and they picked like 10, 15 of them or something like that. And they came back and they read them to the group. And when they read them, we all shared in a chant after every single one was read. She read it, she threw it up in the air, and then we all said, "Let that four-letter word go." So we won't say that, but that was the experience that we had with that. And as we're sitting in this sanctuary in Portland, it was great. And I actually did a young adult retreat a few years ago on the material from the book out here in the Northwest, and because I wanted to start those conversations and say, let's do it. So me and one of the friends that went to that did this young adult retreat, focused on it. And at that night we had a fire and a campfire, and we took cards and we wrote it, and then we threw it in the fire and we burned it and let it go. And when I was at the tour live, it was everything from people who were ready to let go of shame that was put on them, but there was also those that shared, who were the people that would be considered those who put shame on others. So one of the persons said, "I used to teach purity, and I used to teach how important that was, and I am asking to let that go because I don't believe in that anymore, and I recognize the harm I've done." And so they said, "I'm ready to be shameless about that, whatever, and then let it go." And it was a powerful, powerful expression. So as we begin to wrap up our conversation here, I would invite you. What are you ready to be shameless about?
Well, I'll go first. I don't know if this is exciting again, but I feel pretty ready to be shameless about. I want to be more proactive about conversations when it has to do with sex in the congregation. I really want to be more proactive rather than reactive, which is what I've been. And I think I've done a fine job of being reactive. I haven't I don't think I've done a lot of harm especially now that I'm older, but I want to be more proactive and be willing to talk about those things.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Well, I resonated with Jamie quite a bit when she was talking about everything that circles around shame is directed towards her body. And so I'm ready to be shameless about probably the whole aging process and the physicality of it.
Thank you.
So mine is, I am ready to be shameless about my body's needs and desires. It's one of the things I've learned about myself is the way I minimize my needs and desires, and I am ready to be done with that.
Yeah. And mine is kind of a combination of what I've heard. I'm ready to be shameless about the fear that I would have about having these conversations, especially, frankly, as a church employee, where people get upset. It's like, they're also, your paycheck is also coming from them, and that, is affected. So it gets all messed up and wrapped up when that is the case. But then personally, that I'm ready to be shameless about different issues surrounding sex that have been embedded in me that I need to let go of, and to experience that freedom that was talked about that does come from the gospel. So I want to just close our time together with reading one of our hymns from Community of Christ Sings, 140. This is Sacred the Body. I love that this is a hymn that is in our hymnal. It makes me proud of our church that this is in our hymnal. And I want to read those lyrics for us in closing. And the words are from Ruth Duck. Sacred the body God has created, temple of spirit that dwells deep inside. Cherish each person, nurture relation, treat flesh as holy that love may abide. Bodies are varied, made in all sizes, pale, full of color, both fragile and strong. Holy the difference, gift of the Maker. So let us honor each story and song. Love respects persons, bodies, and boundaries. Love does not batter, neglect, or abuse. Love touches gently, never coercing. Love leaves the other with the power to choose. Holy of holies, God ever loving, make us your temples and dwell all we do. May we be careful, tender, and caring. So may our bodies give honor to you. Amen. With that, I want to thank
Amen.
everybody I want to thank Jamie and Tammy, and of course my co-host Carla for the conversation, and frankly for being vulnerable today for the public. So thank you so much for that, and it was good to chat with y'all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes.